So this is lesson 2 for the Unit 3 Aperture and ISO. In this lesson, we're going to go over what the expectations are for this project, what the final project should look like, and also the steps that you need to do to make this project successful. So the final product is going to look like this. It's going to be on your Google site. You're going to label it Unit 3 Aperture and ISO. And you are required to do 9 pictures for this assignment. And then there will be an option for a bonus image. The first 6 images are going to be similar to each other. You're going to stage a setting where you have at least 3 objects in a diagonal going back into space. So as you can see, these are pieces of wood going back into space. And each one illustrates a different depth of field using Aperture. And you're going to be using your Aperture priority mode. So this one was used in f3.5. This is a point and shoot example right here, which the lowest or the largest aperture that you could get, which gives you the shallowest depth of field, was 3.5. And as you can see, this foreground right here is significantly out of focus. The medium range one, you can see this one is less out of focus. And then finally, the long range, which gives most of everything in here, is in focus. You can see the difference between these 3 objects right here. You're going to repeat the same thing, just like we did in Unit 2, but with a different object so that you can get some practice. So in this one, I gave an example here with a digital SLR to show you the difference there. This is a shallow depth of field. The camera I was using got all the way down to, or opened all the way up to 1.4. And so you can see this one right here is in focus and the outside here is out of focus. And the medium range was f8. And you can see this is slightly still out of focus, but a little bit more information is visible here. And then finally with the long depth of field, everything is in focus. It's going to be advisable that you choose an object that maybe has writing on it, because that is a really good indicator whether or not something is in or out of focus. And then the third step here is to just do a simple photograph of another object, and you're going to do 3 different ISOs, ISO 100, ISO 400, and ISO 1600. These are common ISO settings you will be using in the beginning photography and probably throughout your career. Typically, you won't be going much over 1600 because you do lose a lot of quality. And what I want you to do is when you look at these, you're going to get up close. And it's really hard to see on this website right here, but this one has finer detail. And the more you go up here, if you could get in close, you can see it's actually grainier. It's going to be easier for you to see on your screen of your Chromebook or of your camera. So make sure before you upload these that you kind of take a closer look to see. It is very difficult to kind of see in this setting. And then finally, for fun, if you want to, you can do a bonus image. I would love for you to go outside at night and set your ISO to a high ISO. That means 1600 or higher. And go into your yard or outside with the street lights and try taking a picture using ISO only. Don't use a flash. Just use a high ISO and see what kind of image you can get. And try doing it without a tripod and see what your images can look like. It's just for fun, and it's just a good way to experiment with high ISO. So let's take a look at different ways that students in the past have visualized this project. You saw my examples using lotion bottles or using the pieces of wood. Here's some creative uses from other students. They used 3 sets of people's feet is one idea. And here was marbles going back into space. And then for the ISO setting here, this photographer just did an outdoor scene. And this next example was done in my classroom. using glaze, which you can see the text on here and you can see the effects behind it. And again, here with the cups. And then for the ISO, they just use one water cup here. This one was really creative. It used lights going back into space. So you could have these in your bedroom or at home that as long as they go back into space, you can see the depth and that will work. And lockers are really good because you can see a short depth of field here and then all the way down to a long depth of field. And then for this example, it looks like some kind of trinket inside of her room. This one used a lineup of the orchestra. This is in the orchestra room. So several different cellos lining up against the wall, and you can see the short depth of field is really visible. You have to have things that are going back into space. And this student, makeup was really important to her, and she photographed different makeup products that she had, and then set up a scene outside of a plant that she had. And then this is one example of something that you could do. She set her ISO to 1600 at night, was hand holding it, and this is the image that she got. So this is something similar to what you can do. So for this one, we're going to be looking at a camera simulation to get us started before we actually do our shooting for the point and shoot camera. So come to the Google Classroom link, which is the Canon Play. So it's called Canon Outside of Auto.ca/play. And we're gonna play with the idea of Aperture before we actually do it so that you can get some practice and some understanding. So right now it automatically comes up to manual. We've done shutter priority in the unit before. This time, let's try aperture priority. That means we're prioritizing the aperture in our project. Notice on this simulated camera, it turns off the ISO. If your point and shoot camera does not automatically go to auto, make sure you change your ISO to auto and let the camera decide the ISO for you. Okay, so let's take a look at what we're going to be capable of doing with a point and shoot. So a lot of times the point and shoot camera has limited aperture selections. So for this simulation, I'm going to do a picture range for a very limited range of aperture, which is similar to the camera that I have in the classroom, this PowerShot Canon camera. So the PowerShot Canon camera can go all the way down to 3.5 for aperture. So that is going to be the largest aperture I can get on the Canon camera. Remember, not to zoom in at all. You need to zoom out as much as possible. Once you zoom in, it changes your focal length and you can no longer get the wide aperture that you like. So let's take a look at what this is actually going to look like. Take a picture. And there we go. You can see that this field right here, right in the middle, is in focus, and everything around it is mostly out of focus. Okay, so let's take a look at what it would be like to try a medium range for a simple point and shoot camera. A medium range, let's go with 5.6 for medium range. And let's take another picture. Okay, we're getting a little bit more detail, so we can start to make out what these things are. A little bit more detail back here, but it's still not completely in focus, and it's not completely blurred, so it's a medium range. And finally, let's do a long depth of field. For the red camera, it's going to be 8, f8. Let's see what that looks like. And of course, we get a little bit better focus here. It's not completely in focus, but that's the range of the camera that I'm working with. The camera that you are working with maybe will give you a better depth of field. Let's take a look. Maybe your point and shoot camera gets to f11. Let's see what that looks like. And that's even better. And just for reference, if you did have a camera that could get all the way up to f22, look at that picture. Everything's in focus. Okay, so you're going to have to work with the range of the camera that you have. Okay, we're going to be shooting this segment for the point and shoot camera when it comes to aperture and ISO. So what I have set up here is I am near window light. Unfortunately, the sun just went down, so hopefully I'm going to have enough light to work with here in my setup, but we'll see soon enough. So I have a point and shoot camera, and what I've done is I set up 3 objects, and it's preferable to choose similar objects so that you're comparing apples to apples. And notice I've set them up from above, you can see, straight back and so that they go back into depth. However, they are staggered so that I can see them from the camera. I've set the camera up in front here. Now, one thing I'm going to note about point and shoot cameras, generally speaking, they have a smaller range of aperture. Since they have a smaller range of aperture, we're going to be setting apertures to the range that your camera allows. This particular camera only goes from 3.5 to 8. So I'm only setting up between 3.5 and 8. Now, if your camera goes all the way from 3.5 to 11, please make sure you adjust it so that you have 3.5 and 11 and then somewhere in between for your medium. So let's take a look at this. First thing you want to do is make sure your camera is set to aperture priority mode. So on this camera, I just move it to AV, which is aperture value, aperture priority mode. Okay, on your camera, it might just say A. I'm going to turn on my camera. Okay, and on the back of it, I want to make sure my ISO is set to auto. So I'm going to check my ISO, and right now it is now set to auto ISO. That means everything is going to be auto except for the aperture setting. Now, what I've learned from working with these cameras is that they're very finicky. They don't have as much grace as some of the other cameras. One thing you want to make sure is you never zoom out. Keep your camera zoomed all the way in because that's going to give you the widest range of aperture. So, what I'm going to do is now make my composition. I have found that with point and shoots, you need to bring your camera as close as you can get to the very first one, and I like to have the text showing like this. Okay, so I'm as close as I can get to the first one, and do you see my middle square right there inside of the LCD? I want my middle one to be right there so I can focus on that, and then my last one I want to be in the back somewhere around here. So I've got one in the foreground. Notice the square is right where the middle is going to be, and then I've got one in the background. I'm going to go ahead and set my focus to the middle one. Do you see that green? I push it halfway and it's focusing on that area. If you cannot get it to focus on that middle one, what you need to do is maybe put it in manual focus and focus on that one. Because you want everything to be in focus for the middle object, not the outside objects. So I think we're ready to get going. So on here, I have my f-stop already set to f8. I want to set it to the widest aperture, which on this camera is f3.5. And I'm going to take my picture. And there's the result. Okay, I can go to play and see it. You can see that it is significantly out of focus in the foreground, not so much in the background, but in the foreground you can definitely see it. Okay, so I'm going to go back to shooting mode, and I'm going to do my second aperture. For this camera, I'm going to put it at 5.6. Again, push the shutter, and let's look at the difference there. You can see a little bit of the text now from the first one. Here's the one before, and here's the one after. Notice the foreground is starting to get more in focus. That's exactly what you want. So now let's go to our third aperture, which is the longest aperture that you have. And I'm going to move it all the way up to 8. And I'm going to retake the picture. And let's see what I get. Let me push play and see. Notice that this is even greater focus than the one before. Let's look at what f5.6 was, and then look at the difference between those three. That's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for a variety of focus levels with your point and shoot camera, whatever those 3 images need to be. Okay, so next I want us to shoot 3 different ISOs. So on top, what I want you to do, well, honestly, actually, I'm sorry. Once you are done with this composition, I want you to do the exact same thing with another object. So maybe use cups or 3 different cameras that you have, or whatever it is you have laying around. I want you to find 3 different things and do this again to show me that you really understand it. After you've done it 2 times, I want you to make a whole new composition, and we're going to practice ISO. I'm going to use, let's use my running shoes. Did you guys know I like to run? I do. Okay, that's going to be my composition. Is a running shoe. How exciting, right? Okay, it's in focus. We're good to go. So I want to just adjust my ISO. So the easiest way for me to do this on the camera, just to show off my ISO, is to change it to program mode and then come back to the back and adjust your ISO. In program mode, you can still adjust your ISO. So I'm going to choose just ISO 100, and I'm going to take my picture. You're not going to be able to see any difference between the 3 images on your LCD screen. Now I'm going to set it to, my next one is, ISO 400. I'm going to set it to ISO 400, and I'm going to take the exact same picture. When you get onto your computer, you're going to actually notice the difference. Right here, you can't see anything right now. Now I'm going to go as high as I can go, which is ISO 1600, and take those 3 pictures. So now I have a total of 9 pictures. So if you want to practice shooting at night and seeing what your point and shoot camera can get, take it to the highest ISO on program mode, which means it chooses everything else for you, but it chooses the ISO for yourself, is 1600, and take it outside and take it in the dark light and see if you can get any pictures to show up, maybe of the street lights or anything like that. Experiment with what you can do at night for your bonus picture. That's just your extra credit. For this assignment, you're required to do 9 images, and then if you want to, the extra credit. The 9 images are 3 of one subject showing aperture, 3 of another subject showing aperture, and then 3 showing your ISO. And finally, the bonus picture is the night picture. Good luck.